As the Second World War raged across the globe, the people of Mattoon, a small town in rural Illinois, found themselves facing a battle of a different kind. A terrifying struggle against a mysterious and sinister enemy. This week, we dive deep into the chilling and perplexing tale of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Bedtime tales.
It was the night of September 1st, 1944. Aileen Carney, a mother of two, was home alone with her young daughters. Her husband, Bert, was out working as a local taxi driver, as he often did, leaving her to care for the children. On this particular night, though, Aileen felt an unusual sense of dread. Earlier that day, she had cashed a significant check at the town's bank, and now, with a considerable amount of money in the house, the thought of being alone was unsettling. The summer heat was oppressive, forcing the Carneys to keep their windows open, a necessity that only heightened her anxiety as she considered the possibility that someone might have known about the transaction and could be watching. As Aileen lay in bed, comforting her youngest daughter, she thought she noticed movement outside the open bedroom window. But upon closer inspection, she saw nothing. Moments later, a sickly sweet odor filled the room. As she tried to stand, Aileen realized with horror that her legs had gone numb, sending her crashing to the floor. Her daughter, 3-year-old Dorothy, cried out, paralyzed, unable to move her arms or legs. Aileen's screams drew the attention of her sister, Martha, who had come to stay with them that night, at Aileen's request. Martha rushed to the neighbors for help, while Bert arrived home, only to be confronted by a dark figure leaning into the bedroom window. The intruder, tall and thin, held a long metal device and wore a strange mask. Bert charged at the figure, but the assailant fled into the shadows, disappearing down a nearby alleyway. By the time Bert returned to the house, police and paramedics were already on the scene, trying to calm the terrified women and children. The local press wasted no time, quickly dubbing this mysterious attacker the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Mattoon was a quiet town, known for its ties to historical figures like Ulysses S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln. But in the autumn of 1944, it became infamous for a series of bizarre and terrifying events. The first attack had occurred just the night before, on August 31st, when the Ray family was targeted. Mrs. Ray awoke to find her husband collapsed on the bedroom floor, vomiting uncontrollably. As she tried to help him, she too collapsed, paralyzed by an unknown gas. Hours passed before they could call for help, and when authorities arrived, they found nothing unusual. The incident was initially dismissed as a gas leak until the attacks continued. The next evening, after the Carney incident, another attack was reported on Prairie Avenue. Mrs. Ryder was overwhelmed by a sweet-smelling mist that seeped into her home, incapacitating her and her children. As the police rushed to her aid, yet another similar attack was reported nearby. The town of Mattoon was suddenly gripped by fear. Reports of a shadowy figure lurking in the night and releasing an unknown gas into homes spread like wildfire. The local police were inundated with calls, each one more terrifying than the last. On September 5th, the attacks escalated. Mrs. Leonard Burrell called the police in a panic after seeing a masked figure trying to enter her home. As the police arrived, they witnessed another bizarre scene across the street, where the Cords family had been awakened by their dog's frantic barking. Carl Cords, armed and on edge, discovered that someone had tried to break into their home. Nearby, they found a mysterious wet cloth that caused Mrs. Cords to collapse, vomiting blood. The attacks continued, night after night, leaving the town in a state of hysteria. Armed citizens patrolled the streets, but the gasser remained elusive. In total, 25 attacks were reported over the course of 2 terrifying weeks. Each incident was eerily similar: a sudden, sweet smell, followed by paralysis, vomiting, and in some cases, intense swelling of the face and limbs. One of the most chilling aspects of these attacks was the seeming lack of motive. The gasser never stole anything, never physically harmed the victims beyond the effects of the gas, and seemed to take a perverse pleasure in simply terrifying the town. The nature of the attacks suggested a methodical and calculating mind, someone who enjoyed watching the panic unfold rather than seeking material gain. On September 7th, the gasser struck again. This time, the victim was Robert Daniels, who awoke to the sound of metallic scraping outside his bedroom window. When he looked out, he saw a tall, slender figure leaning in through the window of the house next door. Daniels rushed outside, but by the time he arrived, the figure had vanished. Inside the house, he found his neighbor, 60-year-old Fred Goebel, lying on the floor, choking and gasping for air. It would be hours before Goebel could recall what had happened, and even then, his memory of the event was foggy at best. The following night, the gasser targeted the home of Miss Francine Smith, the principal of the local grade school. She and her sister, Maxine, reported hearing a strange buzzing noise before a thin blue vapor drifted into the room. Paralyzed and helpless, they could only watch as the attacker peered in through the window, seemingly savoring their terror before disappearing into the night. By now, the town was in the grip of hysteria. Rumors swirled. Was the gasser a deranged local, a foreign spy, or something even more sinister? The police were no closer to catching the culprit, and the fear in Mattoon reached fever pitch. On September 10th, the gasser struck again. This time, the victim was Mrs. Cords, who had been targeted earlier in the month. As she lay in bed, she heard a faint noise outside her window. Moments later, she was overwhelmed by the now familiar sweet smell. Her husband Carl rushed to her side, but by the time he arrived, she was already unconscious. The gasser had struck again, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their presence: a high-heeled footprint in the mud beneath the window. On September 13th, the final recorded attack took place. Bertha Birch, a local housewife, discovered her son unconscious and caught a glimpse of a figure escaping through the window. Strangely, she described the attacker as feminine in appearance, but dressed as a man. High-heeled footprints found in the mud below the window added a chilling new dimension to the mystery. But who was the Mad Gasser? What drove this shadowy figure to terrorize the town of Mattoon? One theory, proposed by author Scott Maruna, pointed to Farley Llewellyn, a local misfit with a fascination for chemicals. Maruna believed Llewellyn targeted classmates and teachers from his past. However, the police had a different explanation. Chief of Police C.E. Cole suggested that the incidents were the result of chemical leaks from a nearby manufacturing plant, a theory the company vehemently denied. Cole later dismissed the entire episode as mass hysteria, claiming that the townspeople's fear had spiraled out of control, turning every unusual occurrence into evidence of the Mad Gasser's work. But is that really the case? Could the fear of war and the anxiety of the times have driven Mattoon's residents to imagine a phantom attacker? Or was there truly a sinister figure lurking in the shadows, using gas to terrorize the town for reasons unknown? As the attacks continued, the FBI became involved, sending agents from nearby Springfield to investigate. However, despite their best efforts, they could find no concrete evidence of who or what was behind the attacks. The FBI's involvement only added to the growing sense of paranoia in the town. Some residents began to suspect that the gasser was not a person at all, but a supernatural entity, or even an alien visitor. Others believed that the government itself was behind the attacks, testing some new kind of weapon on the unsuspecting population of Mattoon. Despite the FBI's involvement, the attacks stopped as suddenly as they had begun. By mid-September, the reports of the Mad Gasser ceased, leaving the town to recover from the weeks of terror it had endured. But the questions remained. Who was the Mad Gasser, and why did they target Mattoon? Was it really just mass hysteria, as Chief Cole suggested? Or was there something more sinister at play? One theory that gained traction in the years following the attacks was that the Mad Gasser was not working alone. Some witnesses reported seeing multiple figures at the scene of the attacks, leading to speculation that the Gasser was part of a larger group, possibly a cult or a gang with some unknown agenda. Others pointed to the similarities between the Mattoon attacks and a series of gas attacks that had occurred in Virginia in the 1930s. Could the Mad Gasser have been responsible for both, moving from state to state, terrorizing small towns along the way? The Virginia attacks, which took place in Botetourt County in 1933, bore a striking resemblance to the events in Mattoon. In both cases, the victims reported being overcome by a mysterious gas that left them paralyzed and unable to move. In Virginia, as in Mattoon, the attackers were never caught, and the incidents were never fully explained. Could the Mad Gasser have been a serial offender, honing their skills in Virginia before moving on to Illinois a decade later? Another theory suggests that the Gasser was a disgruntled scientist or chemist, someone with access to toxic chemicals and the knowledge to use them effectively. This theory gained support when it was revealed that Farley Llewellyn, the man suspected by Scott Maruna, had a background in chemistry and had been ostracized by the community due to his eccentric behavior. Could Llewellyn have used his knowledge of chemicals to terrorize the town that had rejected him? Or was he simply an easy scapegoat for a town desperate for answers? As time passed, the legend of the Mad Gasser grew, taking on a life of its own. Some began to see the Gasser as a symbol of the fear and uncertainty that gripped America during the war years, a manifestation of the anxiety and paranoia that permeated the nation as it faced threats both foreign and domestic. The war had created an atmosphere of suspicion, where anyone could be an enemy and any strange occurrence could be a sign of danger. In this context, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon became more than just a local legend. It became a part of the larger narrative of a nation at war, struggling to make sense of a world that seemed increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. But despite the many theories and the passage of time, the true identity of the Mad Gasser remains a mystery. Was it a case of mass hysteria, as Chief Cole insisted? Or was there really a sinister figure stalking the streets of Mattoon, using gas to spread fear and panic? The mystery of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon remains unsolved to this day, leaving us with more questions than answers. Was it mass hysteria, a calculated attack, or something even more sinister? Whatever the truth may be, the story of the Mad Gasser serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that remain hidden in the shadows. So tonight, as you lay down to sleep, be sure to close your windows tight, because you never know what might be lurking just outside. And that concludes the tale of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, a mystery that may never be fully unraveled, yet continues to haunt the imagination of those who dare to delve into its depths. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. Hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.